In this lesson, we're going to look at percent basics. Now, you may be wondering what is the meaning of percent? Well, in order to work with percent, we will need to convert the percent either to decimals or fractions in order to use them in calculations. We cannot use the percent directly as a percent when doing in calculations. So we have to know first, how to convert a percent into either a decimal or a fraction, depending on the needs of our problem. So percent literally means per 100 or parts per 100. So when we talk about 40%, this is equivalent to the fraction 40 over 100. And if we take 40 and divide it over 100, we will get the decimal 0.440. Now notice that let's say we have a situation where we have 80 out of 200. Well, that is also a percent, because technically that would be 40%, since if we divide 80 by 2, we get 40, and if we divide 200 by 2, we get 100, and that would give us 40 over 100, which would imply 40%. We can also reduce this fraction further, if need be, because we can notice that 4 goes into 40 10 times, and 4 goes into 100 25 times. So now let's look at some questions and how we would do this. Well, in general, when we have a percent or some part of a whole, a percent is equal to the part of the whole. So usually when we want to calculate a percent, we look for the part, we look for the whole, and we multiply it by 100%. Or equivalently, if we want to find a part of something, that would be equal to the percent times the whole. But remember, we don't take the percent directly here. We must convert the percent. Just like here, if we just do the part of the whole, it won't give us the percent directly. We have to actually multiply it by 100% after we have the fraction or decimal. So let's look at a situation. Let's look at some questions to see if this will clarify things. This should clarify things a little bit more. So to do these calculations, we want to write the percent as a decimal. So we're going to write each of these as a percent. So first what we're going to do is we're going to look at this question 1A1, 1 or 1AI is 1/4. So how would we convert that into a percent? Well, let's go over to the whiteboard and we're going to work it out and see how we can do this. So let's look at question number 1. And we have 1/4 or 1/4. And we want to convert 1/4 into a percent. Well, you could take your calculator and divide 1 divided by 4, and we will get 0.25 if you put that into your calculator. And that, in order to convert it into percent, we must multiply that by 100%, and that will give us 25%. Now remember, you have to put the 100%. We can't just put the 0.25 because the percent is a percent. So coming back here to the PowerPoint, we're just going to fill in the answer that we found in the whiteboard. And here we have it. Right here, the 0.25, and we found that 1/4 is equal to 0.25 is equal to 25%. Now let's look at example II. So here we have, it's already 0.02, and here it's already, as we can see, in decimal form. So let's go back to the whiteboard and calculate this explicitly.
And the next question on the PowerPoint was 0.02. Well, just like above, we now already have it in terms of a decimal. So here we will just multiply it by 100%. And we end up getting that to be 2%.
Now coming back to the PowerPoint, we fill it in. And here it is, our 2%. And here, the next one, we have 3i. And again, we'll go back to the whiteboard, calculate it out explicitly.
And for the third one, let's see what we have. Wow, we have 2.35. Well, in certain circumstances, things can be more than 100%, and this will be explained later. But we still have to multiply this to put it in terms of its percent by 100%, and that will give us 235%.
Now coming back to the PowerPoint, we'll just fill it in, and there we have, just like we did on the whiteboard. Now let's look at question 1b. And question 1b asks us to convert 42% to a fraction and a decimal. So we will return to the whiteboard and work this out in detail.
So here on the whiteboard, we're going to convert 42% into a fraction and we're going to also convert it into a decimal. Now remember the definition of percent. Percent is the number over 100%. So we have 42% divided by 100%. So anytime you have something that's the same over the same, well, that cancels out. So we end up getting 42 over 100. Now we want to simplify this as much as we can. So we see we can divide both 42, we can divide that by 2, and we can divide 100 by 2. So if we divide 42 by 2, we get 21. And if we divide 100 by 2, we get 50. And that's the simplest we can make the fraction. Now, in order to put it as a decimal, well, the easiest way to do it is just divide it. So if we divide, or we could, there's one way we can do, we can just divide it on our calculator, and that will give us 0.42, or we can go to our original one here, 42% over 100%, and we realize that if we divide 42% over 100%, we also get 0.42.
Now, returning to our PowerPoint, I'll just fill in the information that we just figured out on the whiteboard, so it's a little easier to read. And here we found the fraction is 21 over 50. And just like on the whiteboard, we found the decimal is 0.42. Now question 1C asks us to convert 15% to a fraction and a decimal. And so now what we will do again is we'll return to the whiteboard, work it out in detail.
1C, and I'll mark C. And we're going to convert 15% into a fraction and a decimal. Well, as we said with the definition of percent, 15% divided by 100%, and then the percent signs cancel out, so we get 15 over 100, and we see that both 15 and 100 is divisible by 5. 5 goes into 15 3 times, and 5 goes into 100 20 times. And that's the simplest that we can reduce that particular percent as a fraction into. Now we want to also convert that into a decimal. And as I said, we can just straight out divide here. So you just 3 divided by 20. And I'll write that here to make it clear. 3 divided by 20 will give us 0.15. Or you can go straight to the percent here, and you can see that another way to look at the percent is to actually just move over decimal points. So one other way to do it is to have 15, drop the percent sign, take the decimal point, and you can move it 2 spaces, and this will also give you 0.15. Or you can just divide 15 over 100, and again, that will also give you 0.25. So however way you like to do it, that's fine. So there's more than one way to convert a percent into a decimal.
Now coming back to the PowerPoint, again, I'll just fill it in. So we found that 15% as a fraction is 3 over 20, and as a decimal is 0.15. In question 1D, we're asked to fill in this table. So let's look at the first line and see what we're given in the table. So here we are given a fraction, and we want to figure out from this fraction its decimal and then the percent. So let's go to the whiteboard and work this out in detail.
So we have 3 over 5. And we want to convert that into a decimal, which is probably the easiest thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 and I'm going to divide it by 5. And what do I get when I take 3 and divide it by 5? Well, I get 0.6. So we started out with the fraction, and I took the fraction and I converted it into a decimal. And now I'm going to take the decimal and convert it into a percent. Now, as I said, there's a number of different ways we can do that. We can take the decimal and multiply it by 100%, and that will give us 60%. Another way we can do that is to take the decimal, move the decimal point over 2 places, fill in, and add the percent sign, and this will also give us 60%. So however you like to do it is fine.
Coming back to the PowerPoint, we'll just fill in the table here as we saw in the whiteboard, and we found the decimal was 0.6, and we found that that was 60%. Now we'll go to the second line of our table, and we see we're given the decimal. So we want to then figure out the fraction and percent, so we'll go to the whiteboard and work this out.
So here we have our whiteboard, and we're given the decimal 0.02. Well, as we found out, there are 2 ways we can do this. We can do it as 0.02 times 100%, and that will give us 2%. Or we can take the decimal point, move it over 2 places, and add a percent sign, and that will also give us 2%. Now, the easiest thing to do is to take our percent in order to convert it into a fraction, is to take our percent, 2%, and divide it by 100%, based on our definition of percent. So the percent signs cancel out. We're left with 2 over 100. And then we want to reduce that. And we see we can reduce that because 2 goes into itself and 2 goes into 100. And that would be the same thing as 1 over 50.
Having worked it out on the whiteboard, we'll now fill in our table. So we found that our fraction was equal to 1 over 50, and we found that 0.02 was 2%. In the third line here, we see we're given a percent, and we want to figure out the decimal and the fraction. So again, we'll go to the whiteboard and work this out in detail.
Well, here we're given 72%. Well, probably the easiest thing to do would be to go back to our definition of percent and see if we can convert that into a fraction. So we have 72% divided by 100%, and of course those cancel out, and we see that 4 goes into 72 and 4 goes into 100. So 4 goes into 72 18 times, and 4 goes into 100 25 times. So that becomes our fraction. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to take that, and convert that into a decimal. Well, as I said, we can just divide 18 divided by 25, or realize that a percent is divided by 100. So we end up, after we do that, we end up with 0.72, is our decimal. Now remember, you don't put a percent sign after the decimal. A lot of times people make the mistake. When you mean a percent, you put a percent sign. If you do not mean a percent and you mean a decimal, you leave it as a decimal.
Coming back here to the PowerPoint, again, we'll fill in our table, and we found that 72% was 18 over 25, and it was 0.72 as a decimal. In the fourth line here, we have a decimal. Well, we have the decimal 0.5 and a 2, but that's okay because we can work this out just as a percent and a fraction. So we'll go to the whiteboard and work this out in detail.
So in this case, we're given our decimal is 2.5. Now, as before, there are two ways we can do this. We can take this 2.5 and multiply it by 100%, and we'll get 250%. Don't be afraid that you have 250%. This can happen. Or you can take the 2.5, move the decimal point 2 places over, and add the percent sign to also get to 50%. Now we want to put it in terms of a fraction. So if we put it in terms of a fraction, we can take our percent definition as we had before, 250% over 100%. And if we do that and we reduce that, we can get 25 over 10. Now notice how I did that because I canceled out the percent, but I also saw that I have a 0, the same 0 on the top and the bottom, so I was able to reduce it to 25 over 10, and then I can further reduce this to see that 5 goes both into 25 and 10, and I end up with 5 over 2. And if I'm going to now make this into a mixed fraction, a whole number plus a fraction, so that means 2 goes into 5 2 times, and there's a remainder of 1/2. So that means that 250% is the same thing as 2.5, which is the same thing as 2.5.
Coming back to the PowerPoint, we'll fill it in, and we found that the fraction was 2.5, where the half part is really the fraction part, and this is the whole number part. And then the percent is 250%. And finally, in the last line here, we have 4.5. And so here we want to work out 4.5 and put it in terms of a decimal and then in terms of percent. So again, we'll go to the whiteboard and work out the details.
So in this case, we're given 4.5. So, well, we can know this, that 1/2 is the same thing as 0.5, so we can just write our decimal as 4.5. And again, we do the percent the same way. We can take 4.5 times 100% and get 450%, or we can take the 4.5, move the decimal place over 2 spaces, and add the percent sign, and again, we get 450%. So now we're ready to fill in the final line of our table.
So filling in the final line of our table, we get, as we did on the whiteboard, we put 4.5 in the decimal column, and then we put 450% in the percent column. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that it helps you in your work. And take care. Bye.